I'm Jessica Kinsey, the Executive Director of Southern Utah Museum of Art, and it's my pleasure to be here today to introduce our A.P.E.X guest speaker. I was drawn to Aïsha Lehmann for this opportunity for a couple of reasons. First, I was so inspired that she has been able to accomplish what she's been able to accomplish as an undergraduate student at BYU. Second, I love the depth of her work and the way she's using her studies there at BYU to help inform her work as an artist. She's also represented by a gallery, which is a rare opportunity for an undergraduate student. Aïsha is an artist who uses culture and storytelling to inspire her work. She explores the complexities of identity and race, ethnicity, gender, and spirituality. Lehman creates landscapes, portraits, and more that all focus on individual human identities. She creates imagery that has the potential to teach about the nuances of identity in ways that maybe words cannot. As she researches, she examines academic studies, her own gathered material on others' experiences, and written narratives. She interprets her observations into imagery using paper, patterns, drawing, and printmaking techniques. Aïsha is represented by Modern West Fine Art in Salt Lake City, and in partnership with the Tanner Center and to celebrate the Year of Grace, Aïsha's work is on exhibit at SUMA in the Grace Adams Tanner Gallery through Saturday, March 19th. Please join me in welcoming Aïsha.
I'll just go ahead and start. It is such just a humbling experience to be here. Like Jessica said, I'm still an undergraduate, so I'm just talking to my peers here. I feel a little silly being up on the stage, but I hope that I can share a bit of my undergraduate journey, and maybe afterwards we can talk together about what all of you are doing with your art practice as well.
We were planning on having the conversation after anyway, so we'll just kind of start with that. And I have a couple of things to ask you right from the get-go. We were going to do some word associations, which I love doing with artists, because I think that's just a great way to kind of let our minds kind of just get into the experience. So what are the first words that come to mind when I say the following things? Family.
Love and contention.
Okay, cool.
Probably.
How about art?
Research.
Interesting. How about color?
Pattern.
Yeah. How about identity?
Maybe everyone. I think we forget that everyone has an identity. We kind of highlight certain groups, but everyone has one.
I love that one. Okay, lastly, the creative process.
Hard. So hard.
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm just going to start free-forming a little bit. Your work right now involves a lot of pattern, and pattern has been a part of your process throughout. Can you tell me a little bit about what drew you to work with patterns?
I've always loved textiles, and especially when I started delving into work that was so based in identity and family history, I realized that there's just so much culture and heritage tied to patterns. Pretty recently, though, I had the realization my mother's a quilter. She's a fantastic quilter. And so I realized, I think I'm making quilts of sorts with all of these collages of pattern. But that was a more recent association that I made with it.
That's great. Well, let's go back then and kind of trace to that. So when did the creative spark grab you first? were you always the kind of kid who was getting into paints and into drawings, or was it something that came a little bit later? Like, where do you remember first connecting with the creative process?
I've always loved art, but I think I've had very influential mentors over the years who have just encouraged me to continue with it, because I can't tell you the number of times I thought, that's it, I'm done with art, I'm doing something else. And so I think making visual art was always something that was important to me, but it took a lot of people along the way to encourage me to keep with it and keep doing it and recognize that there's value in it.
Yeah. So when did that decision for it to sort of be something that you wanted to do with your life, when did that come into play?
Oh, I'm still making that decision today. Yeah, which seems silly. You'd think.
Wait, tell me more. What do you mean? You haven't decided?
I think I've always loved, like I said, creating things. But I think I took a lot of classes during my undergraduate, such as international development, where I suddenly saw, all that's happening in the world, and I kind of got very pessimistic, and I thought, what is art even doing to help with any of these things? And so for a long time I was trying to figure out, how to make those two work. And I told you before, but I'm actually going to graduate school after I graduate in sociology.
In sociology?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I hope the rest of my life to be able to marry the two, because both have just been really important aspects of, both have fed into each other in powerful ways. So me moving on and doing a graduate program in this is by no means stopping with art, but it's choosing to engage with issues and subject matters that are very important to me in a more concrete way, while still having the art practice.
So do you see, getting back to the art aspect of it, I mean, do you see your art as a message to express sociological things? Let's talk a little bit about the meaning. And I think we're pretty close to getting so we can see some of the images. But can you talk a little bit about, what your expression means in art right now for you?
Yeah, I mean, like I'll show, a lot of, or pretty much everything I make now is based on something that I'm currently learning or I've read that's been really impactful to me. I think starting to get into sociology really gave me a framework and a vocabulary for things that I noticed or saw in societies and communities, but never really had words for. And so I think art then comes in as a way to capture more of the nuance and the ambiguity of race and identity, because I think scholarship is very important in understanding what it is, but at the same time, we're limited by our own vocabulary and terminology. And so I think that's when art can step in and add in a different voice. So that's where I saw the value in making work.
Can you describe the nuance that you're getting to a little bit more? Was there a particular direction or a particular nuance that you felt you were able to get to in the art? Yeah, well, I did my final capstone show, actually. I based the work on interviews that I had with people of mixed race, and it was interesting how on paper, if they were to fill out a survey, they would have simply checked off the box, black and white, and left it at that, or whatever they would have fallen under. But when I actually talked to them about their stories, they all had extremely unique experiences, and this tiny box that you check off just did not encapsulate the half of what they were. And so I think that's the thing that's missing, when we have these overarching categories that we throw people in for important research. It's for an important cause, but we kind of miss the storytelling and the personal heritage and aspect. Right.
Yeah.
And we were saying and how it's amazing you were like this up and coming artist and you already have representation. And can you talk a little bit about finding that path and what it's meant to you and how that came to be?
Yeah, so again, I have amazing mentors that have helped me along the way. My BFA advisor, Fidelis Bueller, actually is represented by Modern West as well. And he reached out to them and said, hey, I want you to see one of my students' work. And so that's how we built up that relationship. So yeah, I tell people I'm a real sucker for compliments. So I think if someone believes in me and starts telling me, you know, what you're doing is good, I really listen to them when they're also good at critiquing as well. I think I really trust people that are able to pinpoint what's working well and what's not. And in working with him, that's how I was able to make that connection.
That positive reinforcement
Exactly.
was able to really sort of propel you forward in that way. So based on your experience, what would you recommend to young artists? You know, we may have some young artists in the room who are like, man, I want to be on that trajectory. Like, what sort of suggestions do you have? You know, maybe it's about finding those mentors or anything. What do you suggest?
Yeah, I think mentors, like you said, is huge. And I also think finding a subject matter that can feed the work outside of yourself. Like, as much as I try to make the work not about me, I inherently become part of it. But at the same time, I'm engaging in just a whole field that's just separate. And I think that's really interesting to people now, is what are the issues and what are the themes that you know, young artists are looking at, and how can that influence a community? So I think that's huge.
Yeah.
And that could be anything, right? That could be the environment. It could be very local issues. It could be anything.
Do you see art as a vehicle for activism?
I want it to be. Sometimes I get pessimistic, but I think I'm very inspired by artists that do engage with issues of race in a very with an activist mindset. I'm thinking of artists like Simone Leigh has done incredible installations on just the rights of African American women in the healthcare system. Or even there's, you know, Kara Walker has also done really just bold works that I think have acted as activism in just traditional art spaces that I think have been really important.
Do you see your path going that direction at all, or more as a personal expression or research? Because when we said the word association, you said art is research.
Right. Well, I mean, those two artists do incredible amounts of research and historical research to do the work that they do. I hope to be like them someday. I don't know that I'm on their same platform at this point, but I do hope I can do work that engages with the community in the way that they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then let's see, Mason, are you able to switch it back and we can see that we have her screen and we can continue our conversation as you're doing that? We'll ask more questions.
Sounds great.
You also said when we talked about, yeah, maybe not quite. That looks like that's the one desktop. You also talked about when we did the word association that you said art is hard. And I wonder if you might speak to that a little bit, to the hard part. And Mason, her presentation's on the flash drive, and if you need to reboot it completely, yeah, there we go. Okay, great. So art being hard, what do you mean? What makes it hard for you in your path?
I just, at least as far as the subject matter that I like dealing with, it's a very complex and often charged one, and I want to be very, very careful with how I deal with it. So a lot of times I'm just working with how can I capture this idea in a way that's appropriate, in a way that's respectful, in a way that I'm still being authentic to my own identity and how I look, and not appropriating something that I shouldn't be. So that's something I think about a lot. And also, even though I work in a lot of fine detail, a lot of the general imagery is pretty like simple. I think you can especially see that in the works that are up at SUMA right now, but I think it just takes a long time to take a large concept that's just filling my mind and simplify it into a simple two-dimensional image. But at the same time, doing that is a really incredible exercise for me to be able to really ingest that subject matter.
That's fascinating. Can you walk us through that a little bit more? You know, how you take this big idea that is so complex and has so many different angles to it, and maybe talk a little bit about your journey of how you did distill is maybe not the right word, but how you did sort of clarify it into two-dimensional imagery.
I look at a lot of art. I look at a lot of art that inspires things. You know, I'll have a lot of the text that I'm reading, but then I'll look at what artists are doing and kind of recognize, like, oh, I like how they use that symbol there. And I think that symbol could actually work in this other context as well. And so things like that. I also really love working with printmaking for that exact reason, that you're very limited to an extent to a certain number of colors, textures. Sometimes there's a certain amount of acting quickly during the printing process. So I think those are the kinds of things that help me have a systematic way of not overthinking imagery.
And what have you learned about identity for yourself or generally through the work?
Oh, that's a big question.
I know. Well, we have time.
I think I'm still grappling with that, but I think it's taught me a lot about my position as someone who came from a mixed race and mixed nationality family. But I'm very light-skinned, I'm very white passing, and I think there's a lot of privileges in that. And so this whole learning process has been a way for me to reconnect with my family history, with my background, but at the same time figure out how to speak about it in a way that acknowledges certain privileges and differences that are inherent in identity. Yeah, identity is so interesting. Like I said before, I think everyone has, a fascinating story and beautiful aspects of a story. But I think, unfortunately, in the society that we live in, someone's identity kind of gives them certain privileges or disadvantages because of these very man-made hierarchical, systems.
And so do you think that you are shining light on that with the art, or do you think that you are more telling stories with the art, or is it one and the same?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. Hopefully if we get this to work, I can show examples, but there were times where I was focusing more on maybe macro level issues, and then other times where I thought I wanted to focus down on individual people's stories a bit more. So I think both are very important it's important in my own process. Hey, there we go. Yay! As well as just gaining compassion for other experiences.
Yeah, okay, cool. Well, we have images.
Perfect.
So, we could go about this a couple different ways. We could either continue to talk as you go through your slides, or if you want to just kind of go on your own, that's fine too. It was a little bit of a break in the action. What would be best, what would be most comfortable for you?
Maybe I can go through the things that I prepared. If we have time to talk more, we can talk more.
That sounds great, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
I'll just hang out here, you do your thing.
Sounds great. So we talked about a lot of the things that I was hoping to talk about anyway. So we'll see, and I'll try not to be too repetitive. But I'm not sure if any of you had the chance to go see the works that are up at SUMA right now. I have not seen it yet. I'm very excited to go and see them. But I kind of wanted to show just the works that I've gone throughout my undergraduate and where I'm hoping to go next. These were some works that I made back in 2019. It's kind of embarrassing, but also I'm like, hey, this is actually very similar to what I'm still doing. But at the same time, these were works that I did before having done any of the social science classes that I talked about before. And I think it's interesting that I was already kind of getting interested in these topics of identity and who am I actually with all these mixed family stories and backgrounds. They're called What Am I Exactly, What Am I Really, and What Am I Actually? So. And here as well, this is interesting. I was going back through old work, and this I had done like a year before I took my first class on race and ethnicity, and I was like, wow, I really was already kind of looking at segregation and integration and black and white dynamics. And anyway, I thought that was an interesting thing to point out. So like I mentioned before, I actually was planning on doing social work. I wanted to quit art because I thought it was so pointless, and it seems really silly, and hopefully I'm talking to a group of artists that kind of get that feeling of being a creative person is such a privilege in this world today. And so I thought I wanted to do social work, and luckily for me, BYU does not have a social work undergraduate or minor, otherwise I probably would have switched. Instead, I had to add a sociology minor to qualify me for graduate school later on. And that class just totally changed my life. I actually went on and asked the professor if I could be his research assistant because I was really interested in the stuff that he was talking about. And he was a sociologist and demographer, and he was studying the residential mobility of mixed-race couples, so seeing where mixed-race households are able to move in a society that actually is still pretty segregated as far as where people live. And in working with him, I had to do a lot of reading about the census and how the government and other just research entities have measured race in the past. And the census is a huge way that we've done that. And it's interesting seeing how the census has changed over the decades and how we've had to have more and more categories and ways to encapsulate and include as many people as possible. But even there, we tend to be limited. Also, I started doing different works that were dealing with the concept of the color line, which is a phrase that was coined by W.E.B. Du Bois, just referencing that there's a division in opportunity and social outcomes for people of color versus white people. And it was interesting doing a lot of this reading on interracial couples and mixed people who themselves were an embodiment of this black and white divide. And so I wanted to look at that, how does this figure represent a mixed person interacting with both the social divide and opportunity, as well as just personal identity. So those are called, that's touching the color line, contemplating the color line, that's crossing the color line, and then there's balancing on the color line. You can also see I started with playing around with the negative space of the paper. I just got really interested with the idea of whiteness being the normal in a lot of American society, and it just being seen as the backdrop and the standard, and people of color are the ones that are different. And I wanted to kind of look at that head on, what does that mean if we just kind of think, oh, that's not a racial category, it's just white, when it really is, and it has a lot of impact on the way that things are run in our society. And so I was kind of looking at that and contemplating that, and you'll see how I did iterations of that later on. Further down the road, I started working a little more hands-on with printmaking, which I absolutely love. This is a lino cut, and it's called Would You Swim in an Integrated Pool? And this was in 2020 when people were starting to come out with a lot of diversity statements and equity and inclusion statements. And I thought it was such an interesting moment to be living in, because on one hand, I saw a lot of progress, but on the other hand, it felt like, is this superficial? Is something ever going to change? Is something going to happen? And I became interested in civil rights protests in the past, and a lot of times swimming pools and beaches were sites of protest during the civil rights movement. It was believed back then that when a black person enters a body of water, they pollute it. And so a lot of black protesters would enter bodies of water, pools or beaches that were white-only segregated, and they would just stay there. And a lot of times acid was thrown into the water as a way to get them out. So these people were putting their life on the line for a cause that they thought would really bring racial equity into the country. And we know today that their sacrifices did affect a lot of change. But at the same time, I thought about, how does that translate to today? I think it's very easy for us to look at the past and say, well, I would have been right there with the freedom riders. I would have been right there with the different student communions that were coming together. But I do think even to this day, we see a lot of talk and maybe not so much action. And so I was wondering, like, where do I fit within this? Am I in the pool? Am I just tiptoeing around it? Am I just poking my toe in just lightly? Am I off on my phone, off in the distance? And so it was a way for me to contemplate myself, where am I within this current conversation? In that same class, I worked with Intaglio, which if any of you have worked with Intaglio, it's very hard. It's so picky and so mean, but I love it. And I actually ended up turning this edition into a mixed media just series. So I think this is kind of one of the first works where I just kind of got excited with the idea of narrative and series. I based a lot of it, actually the original print itself is based off of the research that I did with the demographer that I talked about before. And so, there's an installation shot. That's before I was framing my work. Now I'm framing it, which is good. But I was illustrating things such as the Great Migration, when a lot of people who were descendants of enslaved people moved from the South to northern states for job opportunities. But the backlash from white people who were already living there was very big, which I tried depicting in these. One is actually the historical representation of different ways that people were able to create segregated communities, push people of color out of their communities, or themselves leave and move into gated communities or private schools so that they could remain segregated. And it's really interesting reading about the more nuanced and coded ways that we continue to have very segregated neighborhoods to this day. It's actually quite shocking reading different codes that are neighborhood statements and things like that that can kind of dictate who is allowed to live there and not, based on very nuanced things. Also, since we were looking at where mixed race people and mixed race households live within there, it was also interesting learning about how mixed race people often live in between black and white spaces. And we have a really hard time actually measuring mixed race households, which I thought was interesting. And so oftentimes we think we're a lot more integrated than we are, when in reality, we wrote down, oh, this house, it's a white household, this house is a black household, and look, they're living in a integrated neighborhood, when in reality, it's often a mixed household. And oftentimes, monoracial white neighborhoods and monoracial black neighborhoods are still largely separated today. Sorry if that's too much background. I just get really geeked out about this kind of stuff. This is my final BFA show that was up at the Finch Lane Gallery in Salt Lake. And this is what I was talking about with Lynn just now. I really wanted to focus down on more individuals, the individual micro level of things, because I think I'd focused a lot on, what happens on a societal level. But then I wanted to look at individual people and how race plays out in their lives. So I did these series of portraits. They're actually on large wood panels. And all of the patterns were inspired by what that person chose and what they said was significant to their family and their family history. And I know that they read as paintings, but there's actually no paint on them. They're all collage and lino cut stamps and stenciled work. And as far as drawing, the actual person, they're drawn. They're not painted. So I was playing around with mixed media as a way to embody that mixedness. So there are some of those. If I might take a second to explain some of the symbolism. So you can see I really got excited with this idea of the positive black and white space of, just looking at the way that people are treated based on where they are and how their identity switches in different situations and contexts. Each interviewee chose the chair that was depicted in their portrait. This is my friend. Her father is Chilean and her mother is white American. And so the flowers in the background, one is the Chilean national flower, the copahue, and then the others are forget-me-nots for her mother. And the chair she chose, it reminded her of her Chilean grandmother. It's one of those like plastic garden chairs, if you can picture those. But I had fun playing around with it. This is, you really can't see it here, but there's it's a dark green and there's subtle black flower kind of leafing all around it. So it kind of looks like upholstery almost, which I thought was kind of fun playing around with, just making this like chair a lot more dignified, because it really was for her a symbol of her grandmother. And in the other pieces, you can see that they're all positioned with the chair differently. In her case, her grandmother had recently passed away, so we felt it was appropriate for her to stand and allow that chair to be empty to represent that. So those are various things. The shirt, the skirt, those are all taken from her photographs of her grandparents that she had given me. There's another one. I think the resounding lesson that I got from these interviews was that, as far as on an individual level, race has a lot to do with people's family stories, their childhood, their identity, their just the beautiful aspects of growing up and becoming who you are. And the only time that it became confusing or a negative thing to be of mixed race was when they were out in society and people would say extremely inappropriate things to them, stereotypes or comments that they thought that people think are appropriate to say to a person of color but simply are not. A lot of times they talked about, never really belonging in a space where sometimes their own family rejects them because they look too white, but on the other hand, in a white setting, always standing out as the person of color. So it's interesting seeing that dynamic where at times it's a beautiful thing and at times it can be a negative aspect in someone's life. Those are other iterations that I had throughout the show. And now these are some screen prints that I did last year, just at the end of last year. And I think my BFA show was very specific and very, this equals this means this. And so with these pieces, I kind of wanted to step back a little bit and allow ambiguity to take over a little bit more. I was tempted to draw in the figure, but I thought they were so lovely that they were made up by the negative space. And I'd love to hear what other people's interpretations of it are, but at least my thoughts going into it were, I was thinking about, this black and white striped shirt being a signal for mixed identity, but at the same time, that being a man-made object, a man-made thing. And the true core of someone's identity has a lot more to do with these organic textures and colors. I was also thinking about the privilege of being an ambiguous mixed person, the ability to become lighter or darker, so to speak, in certain spaces to be able to fit in, which is something that I've experienced and I wanted to acknowledge. Also just the act of taking off one's identity just to analyze it and look at it, which I think is something that I don't think a lot of studies have talked about how in college, that's when a lot of people suddenly take a good hard look at their own family history, their own race and ethnicity, and how they fit in society. And so I was thinking about the act of doing that as well. Those are some closer up. I don't know if I mentioned this, but it's hand-dyed paper, and I wanted to move away from always having such a stark white paper backdrop and kind of use that paper as a way to have different skin tones and organic textures. So yeah, that's all I have for you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Sorry, that we kind of are doing this sort of in a
great. I love
very
it.
blended trajectory. So that's so cool. Thank you for showing us the work, and we want to make sure to let everybody know that you can see her work in person right now at SUMA in the Grace A. Tanner Gallery. So please do go check it out, and I know you're looking forward to checking it out as well. So, okay, I have more and more questions. My first is I was looking at particularly the work based on interviews and individuals. I was curious, if you were going to do yours, what would that look like?
So I don't know if you remember the 3. Yeah.
Is one of them, those are you?
Yeah, I just modeled for those myself. Because I thought, as much as I tried to make the show not about me, all the portraits that I made, it was my interpretation of the person. It was like my biases, my experiences being projected on there. And as much as I tried to celebrate that person, I couldn't take myself out of it. And so with those other pieces, I kind of wanted to acknowledge, like, the artist is in this show. This is not the person. This is a depiction of the person through the artist's eyes. And also, you saw that I kind of like sectioned off into these tiny boxes. I kind of wanted to look at how so often race just really does only take tiny components of a person rather than their whole. So.
And what about pattern work as that's meaningful for you? What sort of pattern work represents you in the body?
Oh gosh. Like I said, I think I kind of took artistic liberties with some of their things. Like maybe they told me a plant, and so I got to have fun kind of figuring out how I wanted to draw that plant, and so that was fun. But as far as the ones where I modeled for them, I picked patterns that worked formally and aesthetically with the show.
I see.
For sure.
Cool.
That said, with the screen prints that I showed there at the end, those I did take them from the different countries and states where my grandparents are from. So
cool.
Yeah.
One of the questions I like to ask artists a lot is that when you begin a work, do you have a finished product in mind? Sometimes with composers who are writing pieces, they hear the work already done, and then it's just a matter of getting it out. And different artists, respond differently to these things. And I was curious for you, when you begin a particular work, maybe after you've done the interview, then do you have a clear finished product in mind, or is it something that evolves?
Yeah, I'm a huge planner. Everything that I do, I've planned it from the get-go, but that means that there's a lot of iterations and there's a lot of sanding off, erasing, redoing things. But yeah, oftentimes I come up with an idea and I have to plan it out. And that's kind of how printmaking works. It's not like painting. You can't add on new layers. You kind of have to start over or do something new. So yeah, it just works with how my brain works. I really admire painters that are able to work in such a loose style, but that's not me.
So you have many different iterations of something that's trying to get it right as you have planned it.
Exactly.
So follow-up question, how do you know when it's done? How do you know when a work is finished? Is the work ever finished?
No, I think it's just the deadline comes at some point and you have to be done.
Yeah.
Or maybe I can't pull too many all-nighters in 1 week, and so I have to be done.
And so, okay, so you use deadlines that are pre-imposed on you for that. Would you, if you had the option to go back into your work and revise it, are there things that you see then after the fact? Like when you look at these completed works now, are you like, oh, I'd like to do another version of that? Or do you feel at peace with where they are?
I think I'm good setting them aside. I think once they've been up in a show, I think that's kind of the marker of like, now's the end point. But I do often think about past shows and think about how I want to change it and make it better. So it's all very diverse work, and that's just my reacting to, I didn't like this aspect of this piece, I want to focus on this now. And so I am always reacting to the past.
And this may be really interesting for other artists to hear, but as you start thinking about showing your work, did you have a sense of like a body together of several pieces, or is that something that developed as you started working with galleries, or is it a series that just comes together and you pick how do you look at sort of a series or a body in that way? Do you have specific orders in mind for how things, need to be, or is that something that is more in collaboration?
Yeah. I think I really like working in narration, which you could see. So there's a clear order to things. I think also it's been an incredible opportunity to work with Modern West, but at the same time, I kind of promised myself at the beginning, I'm not going to hold myself to the same work that I'm doing now, because I think that would just limit my progression. So I think for the rest of my life, I'm probably going to end up doing a lot of different iterations of like the same theme, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so going a little bit further on the narrative part, particularly the series with the black and white shirt that there's several of them where the shirt is in different places.
Yes.
What's the narrative arc of that particular path of those images?
Honestly, I actually was just gonna start just doing a bunch of portraits of people grappling, trying to tear off this shirt, but not really being able to, and things like that. But then I thought, there's something to them like first noticing that shirt and then them being able to suspend it and look at it. And it's funny, I love that you're doing this motion, because someone looked at it and they're like, oh, it's a cyclical pattern, whereas I had just seen it as like a start and finish. And so that's an aspect of the narrative that I hadn't even intended, that it's kind of this like ongoing pattern of, taking something off, taking it on. I don't know if you saw that. I don't think I mentioned the title of it, but I called it Anziehen, Ausziehen, which means to take off and to take on in German. And I wish there was a verb for it in English. It was just too long to say, to take on.
Right.
So I really like this word that kind of simplified it, but I like that cyclical.
Okay.
motion.
So that's kind of a new aspect of it that emerged. That's great, learning about your work and everything. Well, one of the things I'd love to talk about is you sort of mentioned a bit of a grappling with pessimism in art, and but I don't necessarily want to go that road. But what I do want to ask you is about creative blocks or frustrations, and how do you deal with those? I know that we all deal with those, and I know that other artists in the room also. And I was just curious, how do you personally deal with creative blocks?
Yeah, I think I just read a lot, and so if a subject matter just isn't working, or I realize, maybe I'm not the best person to tell this story or whatever it is, I have 50 billion other ideas and like quotes and things that I've highlighted in books. So, this is a huge reason why I wanted to do a graduate program in sociology, is I thought, wow, the material I'll have to work with all that I'm going to be able to read will be incredible. So that's huge for me, is books and articles.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I think that is such a great tactic, right? Rather than sort of getting caught up in the block,
Right.
just infuse yourself with more information so then you can continue to explore as well.
Right.
Along those same lines, one of the things we've been grappling with on campus, and maybe it's the same on your campus as well, is just the pressures and anxiety that are associated with life, but particularly with the stressors that come with our academic environment. And I wondered if you have any insights to share about your path with that, or any advice or any experiences that you've had with that, and how to help inspire our students, perhaps.
Yeah. Oh, that's something that I'm still working on, is kind of finding that
Aren't
balance.
we all?
Yes.
I think we all are.
Absolutely. But I think sometimes I get so sucked into, I have to do this and next, and this is the next assignment, and I'm not getting to bed till very late, and then you're even more tired and exhausted and can't keep up with anything emotionally or mentally anymore. And I think a huge lesson to me is to step aside and be with people that I love and that love me back, because I think as creative people and as people that love to read, you can kind of get sucked into this pessimistic thoughts, or just these cyclical down spiral of just negativity. And so I think being with other people just really helps me to get out of that headspace and be present and recognize that there's other important ways to be human than simply just producing work all the time and thinking about hard things all the time.
Well, that's incredibly balanced. That's great advice. Thank you.
I need to take it myself.
Well, it's great. It's great advice to remember for all of us, certainly inspirational. Since you're grappling with such complex topics, I was curious, what, if at all, how much time or energy do you spend considering people's reaction to your work? What part does that play for you?
Yeah, well, it's nice still being in school because I get a lot of art critiques and a lot of feedback from my peers. I also like to schedule appointments with my professors to look at my work as well. I think Utah also is a very unique audience to be looking at work, and so it does make me very curious going forward. If I move out of state, what will that audience be like? I think for the most part, feedback has been kind and positive, and I tend to look for those that can offer me just a slight bit of critique, not too much, but some that helps inform the next work.
Yeah. And so, from the business side of it, right? Are you particularly concerned about or worried about, oh my gosh, is my work going to sell? I mean, I know that's sort of maybe not like an edgy question in a way, but I think that as artists, emerging, I do think that's something that people consider at times. What part does that play when you're thinking about audience and perception and that kind of thing? How important is that business side of it to you right now, at least?
Absolutely. I think, so I took a art business class several years back that really changed the way that I viewed just art as a commodity, I think.
Oh, interesting.
Because I think I kind of viewed the only true artists are those that sell work and that are only making money off of their art practice. But then I learned I can't remember the stat, but just realizing how many artists that are actually very established and successful artists have jobs and have things on the side. And that to me was really validating to realize, if I manage to get a job in something that can sustain me, then I don't have to worry so much about maybe sacrificing my integrity in the work that I'm making simply because I want to sell it. And so hence another reason why I wanted to do graduate school is I wanted to be able to have a job, that has maybe a steadier income and then the ability to make work that I feel I need to make.
Right, so it keeps the purity perhaps in a way for you, it sounds like. That's exciting. That's great.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to talk a little bit more about influences. I know you mentioned mentors, and you mentioned a couple of artists who you look up to, but I wonder if there are other influences on your art, be it artists or authors or anyone for that matter. What other influences do you draw upon?
Like I said, I really love working with professors, in particular the ones on my campus that are hosting speaking events or hosting classes that are really there to foster a community of belonging. And I think that's very inspiring for me to see people from varying disciplines and varying departments using their expertise to create belonging. And so I think that's been inspiring for me as far as figuring out what space I want my artwork to be in, is seeing people use their platform for that kind of community, if that makes sense.
Well, I love that. That's what we do. That's what this whole series is.
Right, yes.
And so that's awesome. That's great. You say you read a lot. Are there any particularly inspiring books or authors that have really been touchstones for you in your process and in your growth?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I think I really loved reading Ibram X. Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning. It's a thick book, but it's very powerful in understanding.
Stamped from the Beginning. I don't know that book.
Yeah, it's very good. I'm trying to think. There's so
tell
many.
Us about that one. Tell me what was so meaningful for you.
So he goes through the history of just race being formed as a way to control and just execute power over other people. And he talks about how racist policies fed into racist ideologies. And he talks a lot about how, he goes clear back to maybe the 15th century, I can't remember, just talking about the slave trade and how it migrated over to the Americas, and how so much of the policies today are rooted in this seeking for power, and how ideologies follow suit. And so in his opinion, the best way for us to treat racism and end it is to look at the policies that are causing it, rather than simply the surface level ideologies of love everyone, you know? And so that was really powerful to read. And I've highlighted a lot of that book, but I'm still grappling with, you know, how can I think about these ideas and show them in work? I think I read a lot of things that I'm trying to figure out how I can work with in the future. Yeah.
And how to manifest in your life and make happen.
Right.
Cool. Wow. Thanks for that. Are there any others that come to mind offhand?
I mentioned W.E.B. Du Bois. He's much older, but I think his work has been very influential for sociologists. There's also, I just read an autobiography by Maya Angelou that was really inspiring. I really like reading autobiographies and seeing how other creative people have used their mantle. You're putting me on the spot here.
No,
I'm trying to think of my bookshelf right now. There's a book right now called Neo-Passing. It's simply a collection of scholarly articles on just what passing as white looks like contemporarily, because it used to be something that people like me who look so white are able to reject their family, their African American family, and be perceived as solely white. But nowadays that's a bit different, right? Because things have changed. And so I'm reading a book about that, and it's very interesting reading about the privileges people like me have, and I think that's an important book for me personally to read.
That's amazing. You talked about how important the communities of belonging are to you. Are there other things that you, in your own experience and in your research, really see that you would like to see, or that you feel are really amazing to continue this dialogue?
Yeah. Well, I think, so I participated in a seminar at BYU called the Civil Rights Seminar, and it's, you have to apply to get into it, because they really try to foster this tight-knit group of students of African descent and other students that have a personal relationship to the subject matter. And they talk about the history of race in this country, also in the LDS Church, which is something that isn't often talked about. And one of their main goals in that class is to foster a community of belonging, which I thought was interesting at first. I thought, this is school, this is a class, how is this going to lead to belonging? But I just became very inspired by this idea of, if we are able to learn together and learn about our history, I think learning history together is actually something that really unites people and really helps them to come together, especially if you're in a group of people that will be respectful of your story, and you are able to be vulnerable with. So I think going forward, it'd be amazing for there to be more communities like that.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I'm taking notes. That sounds like something I would love to make happen here.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Yeah. So cool. We're almost out of time, but I have a couple of other sort of artist kind of questions. If there was an artistic movement from the past, from anywhere, or a particular time, or a particular, trend in art that you would love to have lived in or experienced or been a part of, is there one that comes to mind?
I've thought for a long time it would be fun to be one of those monks who wrote in old Bibles very long ago, but women couldn't do that, so that doesn't really work. But I have recently at BYU's Art Museum, actually, they had a show with French posters from the mid to late 1800s, also a bit of the 1900s, but old lithographs, old prints, and old techniques that were used as graphic design at the time. And I think that would have been the time to be alive, to be able to work in those kind of print studios where there's 30 people milling around. making the posters for people like Toulouse-Lautrec and things like that. Like that would have been the dream, being a printmaker for him.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Cool. And my last question is, what's your next artistic project? I know you're going to grad school.
I know.
What's your next, and I know you're graduating, and there's all that, and you've got all this going on. But what is there a new project on the horizon for you?
Yeah, I'm looking at, I'm working on a lot of wood block prints right now, because that's a medium that I've always loved but never done myself. I'm also trying to scale up my screen prints, which is something that's pretty hard to do in such a dry environment, because it dries pretty easily. But yeah, I'm working on both of those things. And I feel like I mentioned a lot about, the privilege of being able to pass in things. And that's something that I'm still trying to figure out how to encapsulate in art in a way that's appropriate and right. And so I'm hoping that in the future, and I'm kind of working out ideas this semester of how to better encapsulate that.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much. You are an artist on the rise. We are so happy to be here in the early stages, and hopefully in years to come, we'll have you come back and show us how your work has developed over the years. I really appreciate your insights and the conversation. So we'll be on the radio today at 3, and that'll be a part of our podcast. The work is at Summa. Please go take a look at it. But thank you so much for your time, and I can't wait to talk more on the radio today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.